Okay. All right. Well, we might just get rolling here, everyone. I think we'll probably have some more people trickling in as we go. So, thanks for everyone for showing up today to the kind of inaugural webinar presented by TritonWear here. So today we're going through a full kind of case study on kind of one of our earlier customers called Bergens from Norway. So ultimately, what we're going to be going through today is a story about how Bergens effectively was able to utilize data during their training to effectively, not only see big benefits, but ultimately break even some national records. So before we get started, give me 1 second here. All right, sorry, just doing some technical difficulties here. All right, perfect. So before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. So my name is Tristan Lahari. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at TritonWear. If you've got questions, I'm a good one to ask. I've heard a lot. I know a lot about TritonWear, obviously. But then my background in the sport as a swimmer, I grew up swimming. I was a former captain at the University of Waterloo swim team up in Canada while I was in university there. Mechatronics engineer by background. I guess you could call me a problem solver. I always, kind of don't get settled with the status quo, as it were. I always try to figure out ways to really improve things and see how we can make things more effective and more efficient in things that I do. And thankfully, I got to actually apply that to a sport that I also love. So that obviously makes it nice to come into work every day. So then this last point, I was told I should say something kind of funny and memorable about myself. So something interesting that you might not know about me is I actually got into the sport of swimming through a bit of an unusual route. I came into the sport of swimming through modern pentathlon and tetrathlon. So for those of you that aren't aware, that's actually a sport with running, shooting, swimming, fencing, and horseback riding. So a bit of a unique entrance point into the sport. So I actually really got into this because I was a horseback rider by background and ended up falling in love with swimming. So that's a kind of a fun to know thing about me and how I got into the sport. So today, what we're going to go through is quite a bit of good material. Before I get too deep, though, what I'm going to do is talk about some quick housekeeping things. What we're going to do is we're going to welcome all of your questions, but we're really just going to wait until the end of the presentation to go through them, if that's okay. So what you can do is submit all questions through kind of the Q&A function that you'll see here in the webinar, and then ultimately we'll just kind of run through them in order once we get to the Q&A section at the end of the session here. We will also not really be monitoring this hand raising tool you might see in the application here, but so just please use that Q&A feature. Ultimately, if you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, just let us know or send us a chat message. We'll definitely keep it at the top of the list there and try to resolve it right away. We'll also be sending up a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording live, and also a downloadable copy of the presentation, in addition to an infographic around this case study that we're running through. And again, if you have any other additional information you would like, just shoot us a note at info@tritonwear.com. All right. So next, what we're going to be going through, I'll just give you kind of a quick overview of what we're covering today. Because I know some of you haven't had a big experience with the TritonWear platform, I'll do a quick overview of the system just so you guys are all aware. Then we're going to start going into the Bergens scenario and really what was their motivation in adapting a data-driven solution for their team, how they implemented it, and how they effectively integrated it with their team, which is a big thing as well. What were some challenges they overcame in a specific case, as well as really that improvement process they went through, as well as some outcomes that came from that. And then we'll kind of just wrap it all up and go through some Q&A. All right. Perfect. So, as a quick overview on the system for TritonWear, just for those of you that haven't heard of it before or don't know a huge amount, the Triton unit all starts with the Triton, or the TritonWear system rather, starts with the Triton unit, small device that hooks on a swimmer's goggles to capture their performance metrics based on their motion through the water. So we're talking about splits, stroke count, stroke rate, turn time, time underwater, distance per stroke, push-off force, and other data as well, but a dozen different metrics we automatically capture non-invasively from the back of the athlete's head. That data is sent in real time to the coach's tablet for every athlete in the pool simultaneously. So really automating that process of data collection for you as coaches to be able to make real-time decisions in practice with more and more data to back that up. once the workout's over, all of our data is logged to each athlete's profile to provide long-term tracking and deep analytics really on how your athletes are improving over the season, as well as data from pro-level athletes to show you exactly how you can learn from the pros in terms of what goes into those incredible times they might make at the Olympics or other top-tier competitions. Okay, and ultimately as well, if you want to hear it from coaches nearby, I know we've got people tuning in from all over the world. So if you do want to chat with a coach that's been using the system, these are some of the countries that we operate within right now. So just let us know. Feel free to ask in the Q&A or shoot us a note. But again, advice from a local team is just a request away. So just feel free to reach out at any time. Okay, so now to dive specifically into Bergens. So when we're looking at Bergens, they were one of the earlier teams to adapt TritonWear about I guess about 18 months ago at this stage. So TritonWear, or Bergens rather, had a unique way that they were a unique set of problems they're really trying to solve through data. So ultimately, what they wanted initially was really just to be much more efficient on deck throughout their training. So what they really came to realize was that they have 1-2 coaches on deck and 30+ athletes in the water. So what they were seeing is there's a limited amount of information, a little bit limited amount of feedback they could provide for that many athletes, with only a couple of coaches. So when you're vastly outnumbered by coaches, or by athletes, there's just a limited amount of feedback you can give each athlete during practice. So that was the first piece, and then they're really just trying to provide better quality feedback to their athletes, even if they weren't able to look at the athlete the whole time during practice, but if they could provide more data-driven feedback, that was a big bonus for them. Then the other third big component there was being able to see faster results during training. So really being able to see more data during training so that they could make more informed decisions. So not just information around split times or stroke rates, but even more hard to manage data in terms of stroke efficiency information, turn times, even more advanced things like push-off force, where you can't really measure that with a stopwatch or other manual tools. So ultimately that was a big reason why they were trying to find a solution, and this is really what led them to finding out about TritonWear. So Bruno, the head coach there at Bergens, he's really keen on incorporating technology into his training. The key is this really helps him get the technology into the team, and it really helps the less tech savvy coaches get on board. So he's really the champion of the team that brought it there. This is an old club, 60-year-old club, but it's helping him use this technology with a very large number of athletes. In terms of implementation, this is really one of the big things, and a famous Mark Twain quote that you might have heard. The secret to getting ahead is really getting started. So one of the things that is always concerning for coaches at first is a high-tech solution. How hard is it going to be to get set up on my team? And this is one of the things that Bruno saw quickly, was that this was a very straightforward process. Setting up the system was extremely straightforward and took as little as 5 minutes. It was as simple as inviting swimmers and coaches via email. Ultimately, then swimmers and coaches just set up their own profiles. You just have to charge your units, and you jump in the water and start swimming. So really, it takes less than 5 minutes for each of your users to get started. Makes it very, very easy to incorporate from day one. The next big step is really the integration, of data into your training. I think coaches in general, you're all very used to integrating data from a point-by-point basis, in terms of utilizing your stopwatches effectively throughout training. But it's how do you effectively utilize a large amount of data throughout your session, and how do you make it a seamless integration so it obviously doesn't disrupt your training? So this is a big key, and the nice thing here is that the setup takes less than a couple minutes. So some of the key things that Bruno and the guys at Bergens realize it's important to keep in mind before coming on deck is obviously making sure your iPad and your units are charged up. But what they realized is that it was very simple for them to get their athletes all outfitted with the devices if they placed the units and the iPad on a table before practice starts, and the athletes really just grab their own unit, pair themselves up, and put it on with their goggles and cap at the beginning of the session. So it really just becomes an integrated part of their daily training. This makes it very straightforward. The other thing is you do have the ability to screencast this onto a TV if you like. So obviously also setting that up before practice is helpful. What we learned from Bruno is that the key to his success and their team's success with utilizing this data and this technology and training was developing a pattern for usage. So really using the data and the units consistently to really create a consistent behavior of putting them on every day, regardless of whether you're tracking a major set that you have planned or not. This really provides a whole another level or layer of engagement for your athletes, as they know that data is going to be available after the session. But even more so if you're projecting onto a TV at the end of the day, because they can see their data and make changes during practice. So this was pretty key for Bruno to create that pattern, to make sure they used it on a consistent basis, to have not just coach buy-in, but also athlete buy-in to using it. The nice thing for Bruno as well was this allowed him to test something new every single day. So now you don't just have to have sets based, or test sets rather, based on threshold or high speed work, which obviously you can't do every day. But now you can test other metrics every single day. You can test distance per stroke for your breaststrokers one day, or your underwaters for your backstrokers on another day. You can effectively moneyball your training this way, so that you can basically keep your athletes engaged and thinking about all their fundamental skills every single day without really burning them out, and really does keep things fresh. So in Bruno's words, and I quote, he says, "It's easy. Swimmers just put them units on under their cap or on their goggles, and they just jump in the water. And then you look at the app and you get all the data." So it's very, very streamlined. Ultimately, Bruno, just the way he uses it in practice, really leaves the iPad on a table during practice. They found that's the best way to utilize it. He found that the key is not staring at the tablet to get data on a constant basis during practice. The key was him being able to provide more feedback on a regular basis and provide more guidance on stroke mechanics during practice, now that he didn't have to stare at his stopwatch and work his stopwatch constantly through the session. So he was ultimately able to now just glance over at the data, see if something was going poorly, address it very quickly in practice, and move on. So that was very powerful for them. In his situation, they are lucky enough to occasionally have two coaches on deck. And what they found was they were able to have one coach, feeding that data to the athlete, verbally giving them the information that they needed, while one coach focused on mechanics. And this allowed them to get a huge amount of information and feedback to their athletes throughout the entire session, which was great as well. Ultimately, I think one of the things that Bruno said, if they're doing sets with, multiple repetitions, what they'll do is they'll really look at the first run through that set, and they'll see if there's really just things that they could have been more careful of, and then they'll give information back to the athlete. So if it looks like they're losing efficiency in their stroke, they'll give some feedback after that first repetition, tie that into the next run through the set, and then iterate moving forward. So they can actually make changes right on the fly throughout practice. So, if, for example, they're doing 850s and, the first run through that, they're ultimately, seeing that the swimmers are doing really well, but then the last, run through that set, they're seeing that it's taking 4 more strokes to only gain a few tenths of a second. Could they really have just done that in the same number of strokes? So they start really challenging their swimmers that way to see, to make gains, you have to improve efficiency, not just ramp up your stroke count, for example. And it makes the athletes really think about that throughout training, very, very quickly. So, with Bruno, when they're implementing this technology, they were definitely one of our earlier people using the system. And as with any new tool, there's always challenges with that setup process and integration. And Bruno and Bergens were happy with this, because they actually had a rep from TritonWear that helped them through that whole process. So made it very streamlined to make sure they get up and running and integrate it effectively with their team to get the gains that they were looking for. So yeah, definitely we're able to overcome that and move forward. Moving into their actual improvement process, they have a very streamlined structure that they like to follow to make sure that they can gain action from the information. So the key is obviously not just to be overwhelmed with information, it's to make action on that information. So they follow this key 3-step process. So what, and now what? A model that makes it easy to correct problems very quickly. So when we're looking at what, we're just referring to the activity itself. So, what does the data say is happening? Is it happening consistently or inconsistently over time? So for example, are an athlete's turns too slow, for example? In terms of so what, that's referring to figuring out what the root cause of that is, or why that even matters, or if it matters. So if you have to ask yourself consistently if it's, important, multiple times, then it's, or if you should actually provide, some solution to this, then it probably is, an important problem that you're solving. They should be providing feedback on. So, for example, on this, if an athlete is losing seconds off their, race of a longer distance race because their turns are too slow, that's a pretty good, thing to be fixing for your athlete. Ultimately, the now what is really referring to, determining how to address that root cause of that problem. So, now that you know what the problem is, what are you going to do about it? What's the next step for that? So, I think, in this case, a lot of athletes might write off their turns as not being that important in a distance event, but those slow turns add up. So the now what, being able to act on that in training and focusing on having fast turns throughout their sets, whether it's distance sets, mid-distance sets, or sprint-based sets. So that's obviously a pretty basic scenario, but what we're going to dive into now is Bruno's specific case with one of his swimmers, whose name is Ariel. So Ariel was, a unique case that Bruno was bringing up. She's a very strong breaststroker, out of Norway with his team there. And in her scenario, she was really trying to maintain pace in her third leg of her 200 and her 100 breast by ramping up her stroke rate. So I think a lot of athletes focus on that. How do we make our third 50, fast to make sure that we are consistent throughout the race? What we sometimes do though, and in this case, I think it makes it visually look very good because I think she looked like she was working very hard because she's ramping up her rates, and it made sense to her and her coaches because she was trying harder in that third leg because she really felt like she was going faster because she's working harder and really pushing through that critical part of the race. However, ultimately through the use of the TritonWear platform and training every day, they began to notice some very consistent and interesting trends. And ultimately, when she was trying to maintain her pace by increasing her rates, what they saw was she was, first of all, actually getting slower in that third leg of her 100 and 200 breast, which was completely unexpected. And on top of that, as you might expect, her stroke count was increasing significantly as well. So kind of a double negative there. She's ultimately increasing her stroke count significantly and getting slower. So clearly this was a problem. This was easy to identify through that data on a daily basis. So really what we were able to see here is that, she's losing speed and she's increasing her stroke count. Obviously, this is bad. Ultimately, if you're slowing down, you're losing some positioning in your race. Ultimately, if you're increasing your stroke count or your stroke rate, you're really just slipping through the water if you're not getting faster. So really, she's just getting inefficient throughout that entire process. And this is pretty bad, especially in the longer race like a 200, where you're really wasting energy, which you could be really using for that final leg of the race. So this really starts to impact your total time, even though it seems like a relatively small thing. So now, as they move forward, they really began by focusing on lengthening that third leg specifically. So that was a critical thing for them. It was not necessarily about ramping up stroke rate, but it was, okay, how do we lengthen that leg while not really losing speed? So this takes time to work on a pretty specific component of the race, but ultimately they were able to actually see improvements day by day through the data because it was such a consistent trend. So ultimately, Ariel and her coaches were able to see that visual progression on this problem. And the nice thing is, because you see that progression day by day, even though you're not really getting faster daily, you're now able to stay motivated because you're improving. So Ariel was able to see that she was getting better each day throughout her training. Ultimately, as they approached major competitions moving forward after a few months of addressing this issue and seeing these gains, Bruno pointed out that he was starting to really enjoy using this system as well during taper and using the data during the taper, because ultimately he was able to do more broken swims and give even more consistent, regular feedback to really allow them to show them the data right after every single swim within their broken swims. This made it really easy for the swimmers to absorb with the visual trends that they were able to see to really signify those weaknesses. So ultimately from Ariel, in her training, this was really the kind of visual progression that you can see here up on this graph. So up on the left side there, you're seeing stroke count within her 100 across the entire race. So you can see there in the red, this was kind of the before, where her stroke count was kind of averaging 8, and then was jumping to about 11 strokes, and then coming back down to 9 on the way home. And then she was able to actually bring her stroke count even lower on those first 2 legs because they started focusing so heavily on their distance per stroke and their length of their stroke to hold not 7, then only go up to 8 on that third leg and actually bring it back down to 7 on the final leg. This was very positive because you can see on the right there, the speed graph, you can actually see that before Ariel was actually slowing down significantly, going down to about 1.3 meters per second, and was able to bring that up to almost be level with her second leg and her final leg as well, to keep it much more steady throughout the course of that race. So they're able to visually see that progression over time, which was great to see. Really when it came time to execute on this, in a competition, Ariel was well prepared. Obviously, she had been seeing those progressions, so she knew that she was improving. Came into the competition pretty confident because, even though she wasn't necessarily significantly faster in practice, she was able to see that she was significantly more efficient, which would, obviously pay dividends. So really following this, Ariel was actually able to win at nationals. She won both the 200 and the 100 breast. And Bruno told us that there was a visible difference between Ariel and the other swimmers in the race during that third leg, and that she just had more energy to bring it home fast on the final leg. So that was extremely exciting to hear, and was great for Ariel and Bruno. But not only that, Ariel was also qualified at that point for the national team heading to European Championships. On top of that, she actually broke a junior national record and was really the first junior swimmer to break the 110 barrier in this event, which was really extremely exciting for both Ariel and Bruno. And Bruno was excited to see that this solution and this data really benefiting the team in a really tangible way after only a relatively short time since their implementation. So at this point, we'd love to just say thank you to Bruno and Ariel on this, and congratulations to keep up the good work on this. Obviously, they're putting in some solid work in the pool to make this happen, and it's great to see the gains that they're getting out of using this data and how it's been working well for us. This is obviously a relatively straightforward case and example of how you can utilize data every day. But the important thing for you guys in the audience there is how you can take information from this case and adapt it really to your own scenario. How can you guys utilize data to repeat what Bruno and Ariel were able to do to be successful in the pool with your own teams, and with your own athletes? So for us, we've got kind of a simple formula to achieve success, in the pool, when it comes to data, regardless of whether it's our solution or with any solution, is, the consistent collection of data is key. It's whether or not you're meaning to look at data, every single day or not. The key is, collecting more information, because ultimately the more information you have, the more information you have to act on. The key is also then to have both yourselves and your swimmers to look into anomalies in that data. What we've seen is that it's really critical to get athletes involved in this process, because not only does it get them thinking about the information, but it gets them engaged in that training process. It gets them educated and learning about why that data is so important, and also gets them looking at it themselves, because it gives an extra set of eyes effectively to look at the data every single day if you want to. The key then is also giving consistent and concise feedback during training to your athletes, especially during those main sets where you care about data. But being able to just give more personalized feedback to those athletes during training, utilizing that data. And then ultimately being able to also isolate precise movements and really the key things that will impact performance. What's the lowest hanging fruit? Is it my turns, or is it my stroke rate, or my underwaters? So isolating the thing that's important to work on today to make the biggest gains tomorrow. Right? So how can we utilize that information to track what's really going to make a big difference a few months from now, and then rinse and repeat, right? Keep on iterating. So ultimately just focus on those areas until you see improvements, and then ultimately track the improvement of those variables over time. And ultimately, the nice thing is that then you'll be able to really track yourself in practice, which give you high confidence heading into competitions, and really just put that test to work in competition events. And ultimately then you'll just get to see the results at the end of these events. From there, I would like to open it up to the floor. I know we just kind of covered a lot of stuff in a relatively short period of time. So if you would like to, answer or have any questions answered, feel free to input it now. We do have a Q&A section on the webinar platform here. So let me know if you guys have anything at all. I'd be happy to answer it. And moving forward, if you don't have anything right now, or you'd like to ask us some stuff after this session, we'd be happy to answer that as well. As I mentioned, if you have other questions or more specialized personal questions, you can also reach out to us at info@TritonWear.com. Or if you just want to learn a little bit more about how other coaches are utilizing data throughout your sessions, that would also be, we're obviously happy to answer those questions as well. So what we'll do is we'll give 2 or 3 minutes. If you guys have any specific questions, we'll give it 2 or 3 minutes to type those out. If nobody has anything after that, we'll just start to wrap things up. But again, feel free to type something in. I think you'll see the Q&A section in the menu that you guys should have in the application. It should be on the kind of the bottom bar or top bar, depending where you have it located. But yeah, feel free to shoot questions over. All right, we just got a question from our friends over at Rice. So ultimately, in terms of metrics for starts, we do support dive starts. So in terms of, we actually recognize that an athlete is diving when they're starting. As of right now, we don't have specific metrics to the dive, but what we do have now is something we just released a couple of weeks ago called push-off force. So basically, which is how hard an athlete is pushing off the wall, which also translates in the dive. So you can really see kind of a measure of how fast, to a degree, they're leaving the blocks, and that's just on a kind of an index, which has no limit to it. But you will see that in the application. It's called push off right now, but it is applicable to dives as well. Again, one of the things that we do with all of our coaches that we work with, we build new features, new tools on a regular basis, release new updates, new metrics like this push off force, for example. So we ultimately, we add new things to the platform all the time, and well over half the things that we release come directly from coaches. So that's always something. If you guys ever have specific things that you're trying to track, we're always here to listen and add it into the platform as we go. So in terms of validation and accuracy, absolutely. So we, in terms of how we validate, we have a very unique process in terms of validation. We actually have a team of data collectors, 5 people that basically all they do is go out to swim teams, gather raw data from the field, from all levels of athletes, and ultimately input it into our platform so we can optimize our algorithms against every level of athlete. So ultimately, we've validated our data against tens of thousands of swim sessions for all demographics of athletes. So that's basically how we can guarantee accuracy within specific parameters. We have seen some papers which have been basically testing out other devices on the market, and what we've seen from those direct comparisons, we're more than 4 times more accurate than the next best competitor on the market. So highest accuracy out there, and we're constantly improving. Okay, so we've got a question from Mike here. So ultimately, what he's asking is, how can this be most used to the benefit of student athletes who only train 2 to 3 times per week? So, what I would say to this, the key here is, again, along the lines of what we were talking about with Bruno and Ariel's case, tracking specific things over time. So it's not necessarily about having a huge amount of data, a huge amount of information. The key is, okay, how can we track a specific pain point that the athlete is having over time to gain some improvements? So I would say for an athlete that's only training 2 to 3 times a week, I think it's, again, just about isolating the biggest, quickest wins that you can have and tracking that information. Even athletes that train 2 to 3 times per week, they need to stay engaged in their training. And if you can give them something to track on a daily basis and something that they can see improve, that's going to help them, achieve more in training. And it's ultimately going to give you guys more confidence heading into meets that they're going to, hit those personal bests that you might set goals for at the beginning of the season. But again, I think the key is training 2 or 3 times per week, even if you're training 8, 9 times plus per week. The key is tracking data on a consistent basis so that you can make more informed decisions throughout their training. So we have another question here from Larry. Basically, he's asking, where he can buy this for individual use. Big fan of the technology. Says we agree that existing trackers are a bit too primitive for serious use. And it is at this moment right now, we currently do just sell to teams. It is something that we do focus heavily on, is making sure that we're providing high value to all of our customers in our segments to make sure that we, effectively don't spread ourselves too thin, but do keep tracking us. We do have some technology in development that I think you will find interesting and will be much more applicable to individuals as we move forward. So definitely stay tuned with everything that we're doing. We'll be hosting these webinars as well moving forward, so you can stay up to date with what everyone's learning in the industry and how this data is being utilized to everyone's benefit. All right. So, basically, another question around accuracy, more specifics. They're looking for numbers here. So, what we always say is we're basically within the wash in terms of accuracy. If you have multiple coaches on deck, tracking, the same athletes in a given heat, ultimately, we're going to be right in the mix in terms of timing. So, one of the interesting things about our platform is that we don't have the innate human inaccuracies that you might have during training. So, if you think of tracking an entire heat of athletes, you're having 8 athletes push off or 6 athletes or whatever it is push off at the same time in theory, but you're only able to press start or stop once for that takeoff. The challenge being inevitably you're going to have athletes that leave early and some athletes that leave a little bit late, and when they come back to the wall at the end of the rep, it's always it's always a bit tough if they're coming into the wall pretty close together to get exactly who's who and exactly where they hit. So we don't have that, kind of innate inaccuracy with hand timing because we're actually just taking the timing based on their motion. So even if they leave 3 seconds late or 3 seconds early, we only get the timing based on when they push off the wall. So that won't impact our accuracy. In terms of finite accuracy, in terms of looking specifically at the exact time they leave, exact time that they come back, we're within a few tenths of a second in terms of accuracy. In terms of stroke count, we're within about 1 stroke, mainly just because there's things that an athlete can do, which can impact that. If they take 2 breaths into the wall, for example, back to back, it'll think that one was a stroke. But it's mainly all mitigated by ensuring good technique by your athletes. If they push off hard, if they turn well, they finish hard. If they don't take 2 breaths into the wall, you're going to see accurate data. So that is one of the things that we like to say. We try to help reinforce good habits as well. All right, we basically got a question here of, do we have comparative sets on our platform for elite athletes that we can use for comparatives with our athletes? So one of the things we don't do is we don't have, we don't basically save or publicize our elite athletes that are on the platform to show comparative sets. Obviously, there's just a bit of a privacy issue. But what we do have is we analyze these elite races like the Olympic finals in Rio. We also recently analyzed NCAA championships in the US. So we basically analyzed every final through video. So we have the exact stroke counts, exact stroke rates, turn times, times underwater in the platform. So you can compare individual reps against what those athletes did at the top levels. So what you can do is, if you're doing a set, for example, of 8/100s freestyle with your athletes, what you can do is then overlay what some of the top guys are doing in 100 freestyle to see what those metrics look like on a swim by swim basis. So you can show athletes not just the final time, this is the speed that seems a little bit insurmountable for many athletes, but this is the number of strokes they're taking. This is how long they're staying underwater. This is what their turns look like. So you can really give them a little bit more insight into, demystifying what's happening with each of those kind of, major swims. Another question here from Mike, will the lack of 3G and Wi-Fi affect how the system operates? Absolutely not. We designed this entire system to not require internet. So we actually create a local network at the pool. A small hub device, battery powered, called the Triton Connect, comes for free with the system. It's about the size of your cell phone and can be moved around the deck. Basically, it creates a local network with all the devices. And the nice thing is it makes it completely portable. So if you're going away on training camp, in the middle of nowhere with a nice outdoor pool, you can use the system that entire time. So yeah, 3G and Wi-Fi not required to use the system. All right, everybody. Do we have any more questions before we wrap things up here? I think I'll keep the floor open for another minute or so. Just let us know if you have anything else before we close things out here. All right, we don't seem to have any other questions. I do see that we do have Coach Bruno on the line here as well, so I would like to thank him, for letting us use this case study. I know it's always a little bit personal, explaining your team's work and their sessions and how you guys have done things. So we do appreciate you letting us use this story from your athletes, and obviously hope you continued success with the platform. Anything else from anybody else? Well, I think we'll basically wrap things up here if we don't have any more questions. Again, what we will do, we will be sending out this information to everybody that attended. So definitely, you'll have some more information to spur questions following that. We will give you guys an email address you can send additional questions to if you want to learn anything else about the platform. Obviously we also covered a lot of information. So if anything gets spurred later on, do feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help. We've got lots of other material you can read through if you'd like to dive a bit deeper on any aspects of the platform. All right. Well, thank everybody. I thank you all for coming out today. I do appreciate it with our inaugural webinar. We will be doing this in the future, and we will be providing more more insight based on how coaches are successfully utilizing data to their advantage in training with their athletes. And we'll be building out these examples and some more information for you guys moving forward. We're really planning to do this on a weekly basis, so definitely sign up via email. We do have a kind of an email that will be going out on a weekly basis explaining the title and the topic that we'll be going through, and also stay connected on social, as we will ultimately be releasing these on social as well. So definitely stay connected to us. And also stay tuned. We do have a new video series that we're planning to have come out over the course of the summer, which will give you guys even more information on how teams are utilizing the data that you can use a bit more on your own time. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you guys soon.